This V-neck was a terrible idea. I don't know about this. V-necks. I mean, I have a ruggedly macho masculine chest, but there's a little, wow, I feel like it's 2014 or something. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? I'm on a deserted campus. It's very fun. They turned off the photocopiers, so I wasn't able to print off the slides again. So I'll be doing it on the old machinio here. Yeah, it's a desolate wasteland. Fun stuff. Annabelle, you, Charlotte, hi all. How are we doing? Kima, hello. It is, oh, look, March is almost done. I know that you are all whippersnappers and haven't lived huge long lives, but this has been the worst month in history, at least in my living history. I don't know about yours, but there you go. We are here. We are still alive. April, come she will, and we'll see what's going on. Evie, hey, all you cool cats and kittens. And Brian, yes, the photocopiers. How dare they? Well, the printers as well. We're all networked here because apparently it's like 1997 and they finally got networked printers going on campus. What fun. Still price gouge. It's unbelievable. The bee meme is the only worthwhile thing I have done all quarantine. That is untrue. Untrue, my friend. Andrea loved it very much. It was on her page. Many people liked it. Okay, so I was getting a couple of emails today and about the annotation assignment and, questions about how to proceed and so on. And, one of those things that's like, on retrospect, it's like, really? You wait for that day to say, so what exactly are you looking for in this? But I won't chastise too much. But I was also, it sort of came to my attention that I hadn't actually changed the due date because of the apocalypse. And so many people were still diligently trying to work away at it, which, this is a good thing. Many of you have submitted it. That's a very lovely thing. But it's like, oh, yeah, well, you're all probably, I presume most of your time when you're not social distancing, you're out foraging for berries and, clubbing squirrels and just trying to keep yourself fed. So you probably don't have a huge amount of time to go online and do our little thing. So I just pushed the date back. I'll mark them as they come in, he says, making a promise that he almost has no intention of keeping or didn't have any intention of keeping until he said it out loud. Then, God damn it, I might have committed to that. But because you probably are, even in this day, you're probably worried about grades and so on. You'd like to know where you are in the course. So I will get it out quickly for you. But yeah, take until this time next Monday to do it up. Because my eyes have got suddenly, like 4 minutes before I went live, all of a sudden I was just like hit with a wave of exhaustion. My eyes have gone all screwy. I don't think that's Mr. Coronavirus, but you never know. Okay, a couple of people. Thank you. Kima, if scientists said we have made dinosaurs in April, I just nod and sip my coffee. Chloe, we have a guest buddy today for lecture. And Kim Stryker, hi Kim, stop touching your face. Well, I just came from Captain Hand Wash, so my hands are pretty darn clean, but thank you. I will try not to touch my face. Anyway, as always, I hope you're well. As always, I'm going to try and keep this short. I realize the secret to keeping this short is not taking 10 minutes on absolutely every slide. And then I said, well, that's not something that's within my powers. So have fewer slides. Math. I'm fun. Touching my face, Kim. Oh, when I think about Kim Stryker, I touch my face. So here we are in the lap of luxury, and we're talking about chapter 5, of Andrea's book. I realize I don't have my copy of it to hand, so I'm just going to put my hand up there so you don't think you're seeing a blank screen. Voila. It's all very good. So I begin, as I begin all the lectures. What did you think of this one? And he takes a pause because you're all so busy typing furiously. You all have so much to say. Did any of your courses, not non-CBU students watching, any of your courses on Zoom? Has anyone actually done this sort of interactive classroom thing? I'd be interested to see what, if any, practices we have. All right. So this is Andrew's chapter on the HPV vaccine, and I was noticing. Now I can't help but touch my hands. Kim, you did the Zoom class? You've done the Zoom class? No, but I'm all about the Zoom memes for quarantines page. Oh, are there student Zoom memes? You should see all the faculty Zoom memes as well. And never the twain shall meet. Okay, I was just wondering if, because I sort of shout into the void, and all I have is the live chat. And would it be great if we had the whole Brady Bunch vibe going? So, I've noticed when I was reading the chapter that human papillomavirus is sort of assumed. Again, similar to the question that we had last time. I think this sort of, Andrea quite rightly is expecting a certain base idea of familiarity with HPV, given her audience, but maybe you don't know what it is. So, human papillomavirus, look to slide one, all sorts of cool information. It is the most common sexually transmitted infection, and almost every person who is sexually active will get the HPV. Well, the HPV, yes, because I'm your grandma. Will get HPV at some time if they don't get the vaccine. So that's a little bit daunting. It's one of those conditions where, for most people, it tends to be non-symptomatic. It can come up in the form of genital warts, but most importantly, it is the leading contributor to several types of cancers. I think something like this graphic that I have here doesn't have that stat, but I think I read somewhere else that it's something like almost at least over 70% of cervical cancers are directly attributed to HPV. So, and there are a number of other cancers that are associated with it as well: cervical, vaginal, vulval, penile, anal, and orophalangeal, pharyngeal. There we go. Sorry, it's the tiny writing and my bad eyes, which I'm not allowed to touch, and are now just filled with tears because Kim won't let me do anything. So it is the risk is highest among sexually active cis women, and it sort of goes down a little bit when you move to as biologically determined homosexual men and heterosexual men. So that has been sort of one of the historical consequences of the uptake or not with the vaccine. And like all vaccines, just to explain, the concept of sort of herd mentality is that it is not, most vaccines are valid, safe, completely, side effects are minimal, if any, and side effects can also be rare. But there are certain members of the population who can't necessarily have them if they already have immune diseases. They might not be able to take a vaccine, just like some people aren't eligible for the MMR, aren't eligible for flu. They just can't take it. So there's a few who can't have it, and there's a few who do receive it who just don't trigger an immunological response. So as always, the more people who have it, the better, because one of the best preventions from getting it is not simply the vaccine, but if the vaccine isn't available, being surrounded within the herd of people who are similarly not having it, and therefore not spreading it, and therefore not at risk. So global uptake is useful, even if either A, the consequences aren't dire for yourself, or B, when I say consequences when I die for yourself, again, the sort of stigmatized disease aspect of it, or B, if you're in theory not at risk at all. And so that idea of theoretically not being at risk, because if it's only transmitted through sexual diseases, and you imagine chastity is operative, then you might imagine that you are certainly when we're talking about the issue of parental consent, you might be thinking that my child is not in any danger because X, Y, Z. And so one of the things that struck me while I was reading, because again, the chapter is excellent, you can read it and provides the arguments. But one of the things that really got me, sort of a holdover from last time when we were talking about like the rise of the European vampire and how they were sort of some kind of threat, is the role that the sort of the absolutized value placed on young women's, and particularly in a racist society such as ours, white women's chastity. The threat to that, as the sort of the ultimate violation, is one of the motivations for, at the very least, contemporary legend. And we can identify a whole host of other real-world consequences. You could think of, if you ever need to delve into the history of lynching in the American South, the amount of narratives where the justification was someone was untoward towards a young white woman, and that was the justification for the brutality and the revenge on a crime that didn't actually exist. So we know that that's to be operative. If we want to take Turner's idea, and that one of the great threats, one of the great themes in African American folklore is the world is conspiring to destroy the black male body. There is perhaps, you can argue, a sort of a Topsy-Eva phenomena going forward, where one of the other great themes in Anglo-American folklore, or sort of Anglo-European folklore, is the threat, the perceived threat of the assault on the young woman. So again, we're not dismissing the idea that there is actual violence and sexual violence and predatory behavior in the world, but we are also simultaneously talking about the notion that there is this perception of threat, because it is it's at both ends. You do not dismiss the idea that things can be hyped merely by saying, but it is also comprises a reality. So that's sort of some of the vacillating we're doing. Oh, got to open my eyes again. The idea that the young white woman needs to be protected at absolutely all costs from predators, but also from their own temptations. The idea of that fundamentally they are bringing harm upon themselves, and even furthermore, harm upon the community, were they to succumb to these temptations. Not simply the temptation of being from the other, from the sort of ethnic, racial other, but from any kind of context. And this is, and this becomes framed as well with the idea that the sexually active woman, once that sort of theoretical boundary has been broken, is inherently a threat. I was looking for a whole bunch of illustrations for these slides, and I went through 1940s and 1950s sex ed posters, and like the one you see here is a wartime one. She may look clean, but there are so many others that are sort of depicting the sort of the fallen woman, the bombshell, the one who's luring typically young soldiers, because a lot of this was directed through the armed forces, but luring people in general to succumb to their temptations, and of course ply them with gonorrhea and syphilis and all sorts of shenanigans that way. So, but they're always depicted in that, ever so slightly melted Jessica Rabbit. That's probably as close a description as I could get. This poster, I thought, the she made the clean butt, emphasizes the idea, I think, that they, again, it's a sort of monster inside the house, that appearances are not necessarily what they seem. So the idea that they are, that the fallen woman, as it were, is sort of inherently dangerous, a bad influence, whatever. You see that throughout, and you see that throughout contemporary legend. You see it throughout a lot of sort of health and fear mongering. Not necessarily in the 21st century. I think, in terms of public health, that idea has more or less moved away. But whether the institutional culture still engages in slut shaming and whether vernacular culture still engages in slut shaming are two obviously interrelated and yet completely distinct questions. And so I think legend describes and maintains slut shaming attitudes long after, hopefully, the public health has moved beyond it. So the other issue, but what distinguishes this from the earlier sexual transmitted disease fear mongering of mid 20th century, is the risk associated. Because if HPV is something that does not have, statistically at least, as dire consequences on the straight male, again, the privileged, the sort of center of privilege in North American culture, then the idea is, well, this is sort of like, this isn't a real disease, this is a disease that befalls other people. So it certainly becomes something that is, you need to sort of start negotiating that risk. And again, all these scare quotes are in place. And so, I'm not a woman, so I'm not at risk from HPV, because even if I have it, the consequences are none. It's analogous to, obviously with specific differences, but analogous to the ambivalence about risk for HIV from, if you are not in that sort of classic, in the early days of AIDS, that 4-H population, as Diane described in her article, the homosexual, hemophiliac, Haitian hooker. If you're not a sex worker, if you're not in those groups, then it's like, well, then I am safe. And so the dialogue of risk becomes something else, where you start talking about deliberate infector, or you start talking about hidden needles and so on. HPV, you might be at risk, but the consequences are negligible or remote, so you don't engage in it. So which speaks to its lack of uptake as a policy. So we have a number of dilemmas, and I'm moving on to slide 4 already. Look at me just burning through this. Oh gosh, I have my feet oriented this way, so my feet are actually propped up on my under window radiator. I know you like behind the scenes thing. You're a special features kind of crew. You go onto YouTubes and watch all the blooper reels. So there you go. What you have is a highly safe, highly effective vaccine that is recommended for everyone, at the very least to encourage herd immunity and to protect the individual, because because its infection, or the possibility of becoming infected with it, is almost an inevitability. It's the vast statistical likelihood, if you become sexually active, you'll contract it. But something that is oriented towards, procedurally towards young women, obviously first it's going to require parental consent, because that's the nature of how our system operates. And now we have to take this idea that heretofore was probably implicit, but now you are being forced to contemplate the potential reality of your of your daughter, your little baby daughter, becoming sexually active. And of course, the argument is that you want it beforehand. You want it, like they may never engage in anything until the connubial bed of the home. That's lovely, but they will be prepared for that and don't have to have shots before their wedding. That argument doesn't necessarily hold water, and it's the association of sexuality with the adolescent and really the pre-adolescent that causes frisson, because the logical argument doesn't necessarily I mean, the objects, the logical argument, the logical argument of harm reduction forces someone to come to the reality of this as potential behavior that their daughter will have. Go back to the last slide and the sort of the absolute sort of chastity of the young woman as sort of a value that we still hold sacrosanct, and it almost seems to violate that. So does even agreeing to this, does it imply consent not simply to the vaccine, but does it imply approval of one's own daughter's eventual sexual activity? And I guess the argument is that that can be a disconcerting wake-up call. But we're going to talk about sort of the general argument of vaccines, because I think that's ultimately the point of the chapter. And that the discourse of vaccines, something we've already spoken about throughout this semester, the discourse of vaccines is that you have an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that describes the situation, describes why things are safe, describe why it takes into account potential risks. And still, the overwhelming consensus of the community, of the scientific community, is that this is a fundamentally good, positive thing to do. But when that's communicated with arrogance, the people who are less fluent in the scientific arguments are do not have an inroads to an actual sort of dialogue. And if one of the things it's a stopping point is, well, what does this say for my child? What are you communicating to me about my child by encouraging the vaccine in the first place? If you have that misdirect in the in those sort of threads of communication, that fundamentally becomes an issue. And then you can sort of take that a slightly additional step forward. Sort of take the idea of, does consenting to the vaccine therefore consent to my daughter's becoming sexually active? It's the question. Take that one step further, and again, you have that issue of moral hazard, which is this is sort of take that and then make it sort of slightly dark. In that, does removing the risk of STDs, of genital warts, even the risk of eventual cervical cancer, does that potentially fundamentally remove one of the barriers that is already discouraging sexual activity? So that's going into the mindset. And it's insidious to say, but it's operative. It's going into the mindset of, are things like STDs, are things like cervical cancers and so on, which are derived from, but we locate cancer perhaps in a different vernacular category. Are they sort of the justifiable consequences? Those are the risks that you take if you are engaging in this activity, which violates our preconceived, patriarchal, conservative, lowercase c, conservative worldview. And that's kind of one of the issues. I think I typed it out nicely. Yes, the risk is there to dissuade you, and contracting the disease is a natural and justifiable consequence for violating a social norm. I believe we even if hopefully none of us in the class believe that, we know that that idea is operative. We know that the language of plague and gay plague was part of the discourse in the 1980s, and that fundamentally this is what you get for violating the orders, and that arises time and again. I've heard a really fascinating conspiracy of coronavirus. I was told this last night, and this is happening in among at least among Muslims in Russia, which is the conduit through which I heard this legend. And the idea is that, which isn't this is about disease being caused by violating social norms, and that the disease arose in China because of the Chinese treatment of the Muslim population, who now, of course, now they've got a camera on me. I am blanking on their name, but there has been recent accounts of fundamentally the concentration camps that Chinese Muslims are being shepherded into, and then rumors of violations that they are being forced to denounce Islam, and most importantly, they're being forced to sort of kick or spit or somehow desecrate the Quran. And so that coronavirus is actually a divine retribution upon China and the greater world for this denunciation, for this hate crime. And that's actually the derivation of the name, that it's coronavirus is etymologically related to the Quran, which is, man, that's a hell of a story, isn't it? I love those sorts of things, because it connects dots and it answers questions. But I digress. So we have that moral hazard argument, that what is keeping people on the straight and narrow is the fact that should they not, they will receive some kind of punishment for it. And even if that punishment is disease or death, it's like they know what they were getting into by breaking this norm. And it's the norm. It's that taboo subject of young women's sexual independence, agency, that is that is under discussion here. And then this was also compounded by the idea that yes, the vaccine was directed primarily, let's vaccinate young women because they are at risk, and again, a good idea poorly thought out. Because yes, they are the consequences of HPV is higher upon them, but two consequences. One, it turns it all into the defensive, and that most, not all, but most of the cases of sexual contact would be young women, presumably with young men, and so they are. Wouldn't it be just the initial threat? The initial conversation is let's prevent them from getting it, and then subsequently was maybe another way of preventing them from getting it is not simply the vaccine, but preventing the infection in the people they are most likely to be in sexual contact with. And so eliminate, it's like the idea of get everyone in your house to not sneeze in your face and don't have the vaccine do all the work, which seems to be a logical consequence. But in some way, by having the HPV vaccine first directed towards women, young women, it kind of feminized it. It stigmatized it by feminizing it. And as we know from the discussions on not simply the gerbling, but also on the promiscuous cheerleader article, Henkin and Watley and Henkin's article, we know that the sort of the gray transference, the gray area transference between or the stigma of feminizing is inherently one that is about the parallel stigma of homosexuality, which again, as we are moving beyond it, we still need to recognize that that stigma exists. Vaccines for young men, not for young boys. It was well, why should my of course hardy and hale and masculine son be getting something that's directed towards women? What does the doctor know that I don't? So it had that. There's a holdover from that initially initially not malevolent, but perhaps misconstrued policy of having it directed towards women first. So yeah, and I think it's part that I actually skipped over. It put the onus once again on the young woman to sort of protect their own chastity, and not on the larger community to not simply protect their own chastity and women's health, but to turn it into this is a health issue. This isn't simply a women's health issue. So that's sort of further marginalization of women's sexuality in the same way like tampon taxes and so on. People more astute at this than I could probably talk to you about this better. I've had help. Andrea said she was going to tune in just to watch me squirm. I had help from Madonna Doucette of the I can't remember her exact office, but I needed some pronouns help when I was trying to talk about some categorizing. It's like, am I doing this right? And basically, I think everyone's sympathetic to a dopey middle-aged dude doing the best that they can, struggling with these things. But again, a point I've already raised. We go to the larger question of vaccines, and that again, you have this process that is where all the risks have been established and are known, and science is well aware of what the actual risks are. And you have this long, detailed, peer-reviewed, cumulative understanding that demonstrates that vaccines are vastly preferable to the diseases that they prevent. Whatever the consequences are, we can foresee the consequences. We know who's at risk to actually receive them, and therefore we engage in herd immunity for those who cannot be vaccinated, which includes certain small segments of the population, but of course also the very young and the elderly. So there's a benefit to everyone becoming vaccinated. A small part of the population, the better it is, and the better it is for absolutely everybody. We know that, but the problem that we're facing is that there are histories of things that medical science was making claims about, fundamentally being in error. We do have the history of sort of the arrogance of the medical establishment not paying attention to medical concerns until it was too late, or at least until a large enough community was able to summon up the collective experience that the scientific community could then actually take seriously, or would actually pay attention to, and lo and behold, that's how progress is made. But progress is really only made because there was progress to be made. And then you have the sort of, I keep on using the word arrogance, and I think I'm correct in saying that. You have that sort of idea of the absolute certainty with which scientific community dismisses anything that contradicts the scientific community, and isn't responsive in anything but the most negligible ways, negative ways, to sort of a dialogic process with people who demonstrate concerns. And it's evidenced by that "because I'm smart" campaign for the HPV vaccine, because it a priori dismisses anyone who is even remotely hesitant as being somehow dumb, and that is not a way to open a conversation. Fundamentally, you're back to Hufford's idea of traditions of disbelief. And repeat it after me. What I know, I know. What you know, you only believe to the extent that it conflicts with my knowledge. And so, um, uh, so even though, and again, I cannot stress this enough, what the scientists are saying is true, or at the very least has validity and isn't a whim and isn't the result of some kind of cabal between doctors and the pharmaceutical industry and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It isn't simply a dreamscape. Science is aware of the fact that it is imperfect yet ever improving. That is the nature of science. But what are you going to do? But the hostility hurled at skeptics does little to engage constructively with anti-vaccination people. I am afraid that some of my doctor friends are going to watch this and they're like, huff, huff. So Susan Thorne, if you're watching this, I like you and I agree with you and I want everyone to be vaccinated, but hear us out. And the other issue, and this is where we get Annabelle's B or Andrea's quote attached to Annabelle's B, is the idea that compelling stories do not come as a result of and you don't get sick if you follow a procedure and it works, and the definition of it working is that nothing happens. It's like, cool, good, oh well. But if you can draw out those instances, which might be verifiable, of those times when vaccines went wrong, that's a much more compelling story. And so you don't have the vernacular value of narrative import. You don't have that. You don't have the rhetorical strength of disequilibrium and the subsequent negotiation about what the consequences are and the causes were of that disequilibrium that you have in failure in the successes. All you can say is this many people got sick, and you know the pictures of smiling children without who receive the vaccine and don't have measles are kind of boring. And the one picture of the person who did get the vaccine but still got measles and is covered and covered in welts, that's a compelling picture. So you have that strange issue about being sensible. Let's not use smart, but being sensible leads to boring conclusions. It's hardly going to give it the rhetorical strength that you have. Catherine McIsaac says, this just takes me back to receiving the vaccine when I was 13 from the school nurse. I had no idea there was so much background to it. Yeah. And it's, on one hand, I can agree with the issue of like, why is something being injected into my body? I would like to know more about this. Who is this school nurse? Where is this school? What is this school board? And the real sort of what's going on. And yet, because it is, I mean, it's taking something into your body. I'm not now advocating pro the anti-vaccination side, but remember what we were talking about a couple of classes ago, the notion of the body as inviolate, the notion of the body as something that is you have control over, and you don't like it when things go into your body. It's the same reason that we're ambiguous at best about the things that we know leave our body. We are our pee, our poop, our blood, our mucus, our semen. All it's like it's like there you go. Someone else's, no less. But when it's something, uh, and and even food, we agree that we have to eat, but we are very, very concerned, and we have social rules about what constitutes food and what doesn't constitute food. Not the scientific rules of obviously you don't eat rocks, but things like what kind of animals are food and what kind of animals aren't food. And those are not scientifically based; those are culturally based. Why some people will eat squirrel and some will not. That's just a social norm that we have. And needles doubly so, because needles are deliberately about contamination. Diane Goldstein stuff about AIDS, the long relationship between like the needle contamination, needle prick narratives, and even Sleeping Beauty. A needle is something that that goes into your body, typically against your will. We have been afraid of needles culturally, let alone sort of the actual phobia about them for generations. And so there is a sort of that sense of an intrusion. And again, the haughty nature of medical authority doesn't necessarily help us negotiate that concern of allowing something into our bodies. Okay. Charlotte said, I remember getting the vaccine back in grade 7. Only the girls were required to get it, but guys could choose. 2 guys ended up getting it, and they got made fun of it for the other guys. Oh, so Catherine, you were talking about the HPV vaccine as well. When I was 13 in school, see, again, I was still thinking, because this is a new invention. They didn't have it when I was a kid. You little whippersnappers. I was still thinking like flu or MMR, but HPV vaccine. Kima, psych-wise, we are more sensitive to negative input than positive input. Yes, negative stimuli implicitly primes us for action. We biologically pay more attention to the threatening. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. It's a scarier story. And so you have that rhetoric. I mean, it's you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of scientific journals that are demonstrating something, and you have the image of a child clearly in agony, and that child might represent the statistical negligibility, but that is still a human person. But they become rhetorically balanced, and to a certain extent, they become rhetorically outmatched. The child trumps the journals, doubly so if you're already dealing with a culture that is hesitant to institutional certainty. The same thing that makes the vampire compelling now, as opposed to an object of fear, was the idea that they operate outside of institutions. And you could throw the medical establishment in with government and church as people who have historically wielded power over the body and over the mind, and nevertheless have shown themselves to occasionally be imperfect. Yeah, vampire hospital next time. So it took me the longest time to Google the right words for finding this last meme. Next to Annabelle's was this one. Maybe you've seen something similar kicking around, that the idea of, again, for our current moment, that with social distancing, with quarantine, with all this, and that if like 6 months from now, it looks like not many people died, it's going to be almost be anticlimactic. But you don't want a fucking climax in this. You want everyone to just like, oh, hopefully we can now go and see when the Doctor Strange sequel comes out, and not think that we are terrible people, and not think that we are entering into a pit of death. That's the outcome. Having the movie theaters opened again slowly and safely and surely. It's not a big thing. But it's not going to be. It's not a Max Brooks novel. Charlotte, I remember a guy got made fun of too for getting in school, Brian, sounds a lot like the threatening figures John Widdowson writes about. We tell our kids the boogeyman will get them if they do not behave, rather than rewarding them if they do. Negative stimuli over positive. Exactly. I mean, the idea of a disease as a boogeyman is, I mean, that's a really cool observation, and I think very much alive. I mean, first of all, the idea that the diseases are sentient is, at least, is a compelling metaphor. I mean, to a certain extent, you can make an argument that Slender Man is already in that general area. I mean, Slender Man is a boogeyman, but he might be sort of representing some kind of disease or contagion, and the Slender Man sickness is the the cluster of symptoms around bullying. So there is that idea, but there's also the idea of the even in health. And of course, like the zombie apocalypse. I mean, the zombie apocalypse narratives that we talked about last class with CDC. I mean, that's a way of sort of turning this frightening figure. But the idea also that it's unfeeling, that it does not discriminate, that they're not your friends, they can't be reasoned with, and it's not an enemy in the same way that an army of soldiers is an enemy, because they're not appealing to an ideology. They're just appealing to an insatiable need to grow. So yeah, the Widdowson thing would be really interesting. For those who haven't been scrolling down the page, the Widdowson reading is up online. It's through the Mun Archive, and you can, it's awkward because it's an archival copy, but some really interesting things there. So yeah, frightening figures, all of this. The idea that, but I mean, in a way, that's analogous to the moral hazard. Now, if you aren't good, the boogeyman will get you. And if you aren't good, you could get cervical cancer. That is, they don't seem to be parallels at first, but I think they are. A lot of my play scholar friends, I've noticed that they're playing tag. Kids are playing tag with tag, you've got coronavirus. Or even better, they're playing tag, but with no touching, and so they like change the rules. The kids are changing the rules of tag to not actually contact people, which is a really kind of neat thing. My whole assignment is on threatening figure legends, so Widdowson was a big help to that. LOL. That's cool. Hey, look at me! I'm at 48 minutes. This is under an hour. I'm good. 5 slides. I was talking for a long time. This doesn't feel like it went as last time felt long. This time felt really short, and this time's only 10 minutes less. And there's still 12 of you watching. That's good. So for next time might, I'm warning now, next time might be a long one, because we're going to be reading The Kiss of Death as well. The conclusion is a couple of pages. It isn't simply a few. And we're going to talk about the exam. I've started writing the exam already, putting questions together. Someone sent me a question. I'll talk about this more on Friday. Someone sent me a question today about what they need to study. And for the most part, it's going to be, the emphasis is going to be on the second half, and certainly like the short questions and so on. I steal a couple of questions from the midterm. I'll put them on the final just for funsies. So keep you a little bit on your toes, but I won't write new short answer or new multiple choice questions from the first part of the semester. Yes, you could check out the draft. What else? And the what's that last thing I was going to say? Yes, but the essay questions, they're synthetic. Like last time, they're broad general questions. So I wouldn't want to say the exam's on the second half of the semester and then all of a sudden have you feel that you can't be drawing from readings from the first half, because we don't silo these things. The whole point is that there's a cumulative understanding that's being developed over the course of the semester. We're move from ideas of belief to ideas of boundary and association to um, the embodiment through ostension, and then we finish it off with basically the most recent book, and so how all these things factor in, but framed in a particular kind of way. So, I mean, hopefully you didn't learn 20 individual things. You learned one massive thing, nuanced, subtle, over 20 readings or whatever. So that's that. Um, Okay, for the annotation assignment, does retelling the legend count towards the 1,500 word cap, or should the legend itself and analysis be separate documents? Um, More or less the second, as you were saying. The 1,500 words is sort of to really sort of describe the analysis as best you can, because otherwise you could, and this isn't something that you would do, you Charlotte would do, but otherwise, the whole you could find a 1,400 word version of it and just say ta-da and be pretty close, and that's not the intent. So yeah, the analysis part is the 1,500 words. The versions part is not it. For citations, is Chicago or APA? I think I say somewhere that I want you to use the one that you are most familiar with, who you're the most comfortable with. If you're, I mean, the benefit is there's hardly any folklore majors, so I don't have to be particularly puritanical about it. If you do a Chicago or an APA or an MLA for that matter, in your sort of home discipline, do that. I would avoid APA like the plague, personally, because it's terrible. It's gross, but I also know that it's a standard. So if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. I really just ask for consistency, and I think that's really all we should be doing. If you were folklorists, use Chicago is the short answer, but you use whatever you want. Just it always heartens me when people ask that question, because at least they're sort of concerned by it. Kima, oh, syncretism. Yes, there we go. Catch me citing everything in APA. I know Chicago's prettier, but I was lazy. So I can be gross and use APA. Catherine, yes, you can be gross. You can use APA. Running head is just the dumbest thing in the world. Oh, so many headings that are just completely unnecessary. The margins are wider than they need to be. What are you doing? What are you doing, APA? I know you're drumming up business because you're driving people crazy with your dumb styles that drive people crazy because they're dumb. Anyway, have you sent my feedback by any chance? No, I'll do that soon. All righty. We're now at 53 minutes. I hope you are all well. As ever, stay safe and healthy. You too, John James, and everybody. I've been talking to the folklorists and wondering, asking around, because we're interested in like new social habits that are emerging, and things like how are people signing off their emails, how are people ending their phone conversations, how are people meeting people in the streets, and how nice it is for strangers to be telling you, stay safe, be well. It's and often doubly so because the people who usually talk about staying safe are your sort of closer intimates. But the weirds are we're all in this together, so it's very nice. Again, I hope you're well, and I think I'm going to go. I've been washing my hands so much, Kim, that my skin is dry. So I'm going to venture out into a store and I'm going to get myself some moisturizer. Y'all good? Ian, be welled before it was cool. Yes, I do. I'm ahead of my time. Bye bye. Bye bye, everybody. Say bye bye.